it's top of the hour, and again, my name is Kimberly. I want to welcome you to AML Gray Matters webinar. We have with us today Barbara Padega. She is with Leeward in the Cayman Islands. Barbara, tell us a little bit about your background and Leeward, and if you don't mind, for just maybe about a minute, just so people know who you are.
Sure. Hi, everybody. As Kimberly said, my name is Barbara, and I am with Leeward Management Cayman. I am the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of Leeward, and my history is as a lawyer. I started out as a litigator, and I've worked at a few of the big offshore firms over the course of my career. I'm fairly new at Leeward. Leeward is a young business here in the Cayman Islands that provides governance services in a very tailored and bespoke kind of way, with a focus on funds management, funds directorships, and crypto and digital assets. And it started off as a very small business with the intention of keeping it very small and boutique. And we have been a victim of our tremendous success. We are growing like mad, and we are now offering a broader range of services, including compliance services, in terms of AML and AEOI support for our
Okay,
clients. So
wonderful, wonderful.
we're busy is the answer.
Yes. Yeah, we were
Yes,
just chatting about how busy I think a lot of people are, and how it's just like you can't seem to take a break in compliance these days. So that extra support is, I'm sure, much needed. You said you have a focus on the funds industry as
yeah,
well.
and
So
and
you
digital assets.
and
So
digital
it's
assets. Okay.
specialized stuff, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure that impacts how the reports are written as well to the board.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So before we kick off, we're going to have a little bit of housekeeping. So this should take about an hour. Again, those two handouts, including the one which is an article, kind of a bit of an article. It's an interview with a board member that I wrote back in 2021. That might kind of give some of you some idea of how things have changed, if any. Um, and there will be certificates of attendance automatically generated, so you will get those about an hour after the end. And we'll also take questions at the end as well, so that Barbara can get through her presentation. Also, we have a new website, so now you can register, and I'm just going to go to that page there. Go to our new website. The AML Gray Matters link is at the top. You can see upcoming topics and guests and register directly from the website, as well as search for previous topics and get those recordings, and even download these slides as well from those. Um, so do visit the website silocompliance.com if you don't mind. Okay, great. So Barbara, it's 4 minutes after, so we're gonna go ahead and just let you kick off, and I will navigate slides. I'm gonna turn off my camera if you also want to turn off yours,
Same.
so
Yep.
people can concentrate on the slides. Thank you.
Okay. Have I managed to turn my camera off?
You have.
Excellent. Okay, let me close this box so we can get started. All right. Well, as I mentioned, I wear a lot of hats over here at Leeward as General Counsel, as COO, and as Chief Compliance Officer. And that's given me some different perspectives on the preparation and delivery of an AML report for a board or for management of an institution. I've sat at the table as a director and received the reports. I've sat at the table as general counsel and listened to the board respond to an AML officer's report. And more latterly, I've been more involved in actually preparing and presenting, getting the reports ready for presentation. So today, if we can pop to the first slide, we're going to talk about how to create a solid AML report and how to present it in a way that really gives value to the directors who are sitting at a table. I get very excited about AML reports because this is something that I care deeply about, but I've been in way too many situations where you're presenting your AML report to a board of directors and everybody's on their phones and somebody's posting on LinkedIn and everybody's just kind of looking up every few seconds and smiling and nodding at you. You haven't really captured their attention and you haven't been able to make your message stick. So today's objectives, if we can pop to the next slide, is to navigate through this unfortunate situation. And we're going to do this by getting a better understanding of why AML matters to the board of directors and how it impacts the organization's strategy, reputation, and risk management. And then we're going to use that knowledge to talk about how to deliver effective AML reports in the form of data that is concise and relevant and actionable. And then lastly, how to engage with the directors to ensure that you get a good impact with them. And so I'll be giving you some practical tips on how to command attention and foster understanding and drive informed decision making. So the first question we have to ask is, why does AML matter to directors or managers of a business? And I think in this group, we can all be very honest. They'd rather not. They'd rather not care. They'd rather not. They'd really, I mean, I'm just being honest.
No,
Um,
I agree.
but they have to. If they're in a regulated sector, then failing to care about AML is simply not an option. Disregarding your AML obligations is an offense, and so that's a pretty strong motivator. But even more than the threat of things like fines or sanctions, directors really care about the success of their business. And a good director will see that AML understanding and knowing what the AML situation is in their business is a necessary part of actually doing business. A great director will understand that AML understanding is key to the decision making that they have to do as a director to make their business a success. So I think if I've put up a slide here that talks about the board's three key responsibilities: oversight, accountability, and decision making. But if you had a couple beers with the director and you caught them in an unguarded moment and you asked them, what are your key responsibilities as a board member? They probably wouldn't prattle on about accountability and oversight. They would probably say, my job is to protect the company, to grow the money, and make this business a success. They're not going to instantly jump to the nuances of what their oversight responsibilities are with respect to AML, but it is part of what they have to do as a director. The directors are ultimately responsible for the effectiveness of the company's AML policies and programs. And this is part of their accountability to the shareholders. They have to demonstrate compliance to their regulators, all of the stakeholders. And so it is a key decision making arena for the directors. Setting the risk strategy for the company and assuring that adequate resources are allocated effectively is a key part of these three things that I've got up on the screen about the director's role. But the takeaway from this is that when directors think about their role, they don't want to dive into the minutiae of AML compliance program. They want to say, I've hired a guy to do that. I've hired a compliance guy or gal, and she does this. So if you took the compliance officer out for a couple of beers and you caught them in an unguarded moment and you asked them what their role is, they probably wouldn't say, oh, I'm a trusted advisor to the board of directors. Maybe they would. And if they did, that's great. But they would more likely launch into a detailed and granular description of how they craft the AML policy, and how you identify your compliance subjects and what software you use to screen them. And you really kind of dive into the nuts and bolts of the AML officer's day-to-day activities. And all of that is true. But there's a whole other side to the compliance officer's role, and that is really to be the risk partner and to serve as a translator, taking that granular AML information that a director probably doesn't want to hear about and translate it into strategic terms, words and language that the board understands. So, as an AML officer, preparing a report and delivering it at a board meeting, you're not just a technocrat delivering data. You really are a key leader in the business. So why do we have this disconnect? Why do we have directors falling asleep? If they're ultimately responsible for the AML policies and programs, and it's their neck on the block, and if your role is there to be their risk partner and keep their neck off the block, why are you not the most important person in a director's life? You would think that they would be deeply, deeply involved in concern with what you're telling them, and yet they're falling asleep. Why is that? Well, I think that AML officers and directors sometimes feel that they're on the same ship, but they're speaking different languages. The board is up on the bridge, charting the course and focusing on strategy, growth, and big picture risks, while compliance is down in the engine room, making sure that the engine is running and the fuel is clean and no one's smuggling drugs in the cargo hold. So to try to address this gap between those two styles, I took kind of a hard look at myself as a compliance professional. And I took a look at my managing director, who thankfully is off island today and won't know that I'm talking about him while he's not here. And so I made a little list of what made us different and tried to use that knowledge to better communicate with each other. So I think we can all go through this little exercise mentally together to understand how our minds work and how we're communicating. So if I look at my focus, I can tell you that every day my focus is on risk mitigation. I wake up in the morning thinking, ugh, what's going to go wrong today? I cover up the pan when I'm cooking the bacon because it's going to splatter and I know it's going to splatter, and I take mitigation efforts against that. When I'm driving into work on the bypass here in the Cayman Islands, I just assume every idiot on the road is trying to hit me. And I drive defensively. When I get an email, I squint at it thinking, this could be a virus. I better not. Do I know this guy? When I see my boss come in the mornings, he's got a very different attitude towards the world. He comes in each day with the wide world in front of him, thinking about what he can make of it today. And that's just a very different approach to how things go. He's a very detailed oriented guy, but he's not looking at how can I focus on the details to avoid risk, but how can I understand risk and use it to my advantage. So we have to be conscious of these differences in our mindset. And when you ask me for information about, say, AML regulations, you're going to get a memo from me. You're going to get a memo quoting the statute, quoting the regs, excerpts from the guidance. And when I hear him talk about new regulations to a client, it's much broader in its view. It's always accurate and painstaking, but it's just a very different approach to how we respond to the same kinds of questions. So when you look at this slide in front of you, have a look through here and see where you sit. Are you detailed oriented and rules driven like me? Or are you more big picture and decision focused? Are you very methodical and analytical and prone to quote legislation at people whether they ask for it or not? Or are you more of a visionary and more adaptable in your thinking? These kinds of self-assessments can really help you understand if you're having a failure of communication. So this kind of self-analysis can really help you. So let's take a look at how we might apply what we know about ourselves to how we approach these jobs um, as an AML professional. So let's start by looking at written reports, and we're going to talk about verbal presentation later. So I went digging around in our client files to prepare for this presentation, and I found AML reports of every size, shape, and color. I found AML reports that were delivered to boards that we manage that were just a paragraph long. And I found one that was 52 pages. That's 52 pages of text, not counting the appendices where all the data was. So what can we deduce about the authors of those two reports? In the first one, you probably have somebody who's got that broader view and a wider look on things. And the 52-page guy either had something go really wrong in their business that day, or was probably feeling that his best approach was to give the board as much information as possible, and then he couldn't possibly be wrong because he told you everything. Neither of these is a great approach. So how should you proceed? What is the Goldilocks zone for an AML report? Um, well, it depends, as always. There are going to be days when that 50-page report is warranted, and I hope I never have one of those days, but they can happen. And but trust me when I tell you that unless the roof is actually on fire, no board member is going to read a 50-page report. It's too dense, and you're not speaking their language. You should always break your report down, no matter how long it ends up being in the end. You want to have at the very beginning a one-page executive summary. That's always going to be the first page on your AML report. And if you can't get your executive summary done in one page, then you've done something wrong, or something really, truly terrible has happened in your world. So sit down and create a template for your reports that has the executive summary on page 1. And then you're not going to fill that in. Leave that. Go on to the body of your report and start there. And these are the key things that you want to cover. The core content of your report is going to be your risk review. So you're going to want to talk about things like the high risk clients, geographical risk, your risk overview. Next up, you're going to want to talk about your key metrics. Did you get sanctions hits? Have you identified any PEPs? Are there adverse media cases out there that are of concern to the people upon which you're reporting? You're also going to want to carve out some space for emerging threats. You're not just a responsive technocrat saying this is what happened. Part of your job is very much to talk about what do we think is going to happen, and what threats are visible on the horizon. You're then going to want to talk about actions taken and how you've been proactive in your compliance tasks. This is not just to keep the board informed about what you've actually done and to satisfy them that perhaps what you talked about in the last report has now been taken care of. It's also a little bit of self-promotion. You never want the directors to walk away thinking, I don't know why we have this compliance program. Nothing ever happens. They show up at every meeting and tell us everything is fine. Make sure that you're doing a little bit of self-promoting and touting your proactive compliance, what you've actually done to head off problems before they arose. And then lastly, you're going to want to have decision or action points, which are the areas that need to get approval or action from the board members. Now, it's up to you what order you put things in. I tend to move the order around in my writing so that anything scary or bad appears first, and that catches the attention of the reader. And then the middle of the stuff is kind of the other bits, the things that are just business as usual. And after you've done your initial draft of each section, I want you to get up, walk away from it, go get a coffee, take a little stroll around the office, and then come back to your chair with a different hat on. I want you to go and put a director hat on. And with your director hat on, look at what you've written and say, why do I care about this? You wrote it with your compliance officer hat on, and you cared about it because you're a compliance officer. But now you have to ask yourself the so what question as a director. If it isn't immediately apparent to you with your director hat on, why you've written this, why you've talked about these points, then you need to revise your work to tailor it better so that it does speak to the director and they understand so what. So let's take a real life, well, no, not a real life. Let's take a ridiculous example of how this could go. Let's say that there have been a number of technical amendments to the AML regulations, and suddenly we all need to specify the eye color of each of our compliance subjects. And for those of you who are giggling right now, don't kid yourself. It's only a matter of time before they start asking us for eye scans. How do you convey this to the directors in your report? Well, here's what, sadly, I would be tempted to do, and it's what not to do. But I would write a very extensive and lawyerly summary of the anti-money laundering ophthalmologic due diligence regulations. And I would talk about things like augmented biometric-based client verification protocols and ocular pigmentation metrics and how we're going to weight our scans accordingly. And then I would go on and on and on, like on the next slide, where I would talk about kind of the core tenets of the regime and what we as compliance officer now have to do. We high resolution images and third party attestations. And even that wouldn't be quite enough for me. I would keep going and I would talk about enhanced monitoring for chromatic variability and how we deal with hazel eyes in our subjects. Are they green? Are they brown? I don't know. And I would keep going again, and I would probably talk more about prohibited ocular profiles and escalations and things like that. And how many of you even noticed that in this little presentation, I've just duplicated the paragraphs of the last two slides? Probably nobody noticed because it's gobbledygook and nobody
I
reads.
I agree. I didn't notice.
I should have known that Kim would notice. Okay, maybe in this crowd, a lot of you noticed because you're all those detail-oriented people, but a director's not going to notice. They will have stopped reading this after the first paragraph. I can guarantee you they've stopped reading it. It's too technical and it's too much noise. So what do you actually do? You have to tell the board very plainly what the new regulations are about. The new regulations require the company to collect and verify the eye color of each compliance subject. They don't care how you're going to do it. They just need to know that they have to do it from now on. And they're going to say, this is idiotic. Why do we have to do this? And they would be correct. So you need to tell them why they have to do this, that this regulation has enforcement penalties for non-compliance. And so we have to comply and we have to put it into our policies so that we can be sure that we do apply. And then you need to follow this up with a call to action where you tell the board exactly what you're going to do to prepare for the new regulations, and the board is notified exactly what they need to do to help you do that. So in our ridiculous example, we tell them that we've got it all under control. We're going to have an implementation plan and then set out very clearly for the board in numbered format, preferably, exactly what kind of guidance you're going to want from the board to allow you to do what you need to do to prepare. So in this case, we might want the board to give us some directions on how you want us to convey this to our investors or to our compliance subjects. And we might need some board action on a training program to help us all figure out what color people's eyes are, et cetera, et cetera. But number it and make it a very clear set of action points for the board. So our ridiculous example is really a way to show you in an exaggerated and hopefully comical way the common pitfalls to avoid. You've got to really avoid overloading your AML reports with details that are irrelevant to the board. It might be very relevant to you. Figuring out how you're going to do these ocular scans is very important to the compliance officer who has to do them, but the board doesn't care. And then presented in our three-level way with the executive summary at the front, the material in the middle, and any data in the appendices. If you feel that it is appropriate, I have seen it where the new regulations are excerpted and put into an appendix. That depends a little bit on the type of board that you were dealing with. If I was dealing with a fund board, for example, these are professional directors who are used to the nuances of compliance requirements, I would be inclined to throw in the key portions of the regulations themselves. But in other cases, if it's a company that's not regularly involved in onboarding and due diligence, I probably wouldn't. So be aware of your audience. And just regardless of who the audience is, avoid using the jargon that just alienates the people trying to read the report. AML, CFT, KYC, CDD, BO, FATF, STR, SAR, PEP, DFNB, FIU. This is our secret code. It's not theirs. Their secret code is very different. Their secret code is things like risk, cost, expense, stuff like that. So I mentioned when we went through our silly example of the new regulations that you should always end with an action. In the bad example that we just went through, we failed to give the board clear direction on what's going to happen next. We basically said, here's this incredibly complex new regulation. What do you want us to do about it? And that's just not going to get you a Christmas bonus. The directors don't want to think, what are we going to do about it? What you need to do is apply your experience, your expertise, your deep understanding of the business, as well as its software and its procedures and its personnel, to steer the board to get what you need from them. And again, the best way to do that is ending with those action points. Now, in our example, there were a lot of action points because it was a new regulation coming in. But a lot of times when you're giving your AML report, there's not a lot of action that needs to happen. Everything's fine. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing. conclude with that statement, even if you feel that it's kind of obvious and redundant. A lot of times the board is just going to flip to that paragraph in the report. Are actions required? Nope. Everything's fine. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. But make sure that you set that out. If there are multiple action points arising, then I do recommend that you put them in a table at the back so that it's easy to excerpt it as they make their way through. Um, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll just unstaple that table and take that with them when they take their board minutes back to their desk, and then they'll put a check mark next to each thing that they do. So putting those multiple action points in a table can be a real boon rather than having to require the directors to pick through the whole report and highlight the things that they need. And just always make your recommendations clear. Honestly, I think this is the hardest point for many of us. The board is relying on us. And so we can't waffle. We can't say, oh, we had this hit, could be a concern. That's not what they're paying you for. We had this hit, here's why. Here's what we did to confirm the hit. It looks accurate. These are the recommendations. These are your options. This is what you can do. And kind of none of this, waffling about. So in our ridiculous example, you might want to make recommendations to the board, even if you're just setting it up for them to cross it off the list. So, the first option might be to, hire an in-house ophthalmologist. That might be your first recommendation to the board. The second recommendation might be, just laugh at the ridiculousness of the example. And then the third recommendation would be enhance your existing identification verification protocols so that you get the necessary data and take a risk-based approach to those with hazel eyes. Your board is going to accept the latter recommendation, and that's because you've given them something that they can grab hold to, they can grab hold of, and they can say, this is what our compliance team thinks that we ought to be doing. This is what we ought to be doing. Okay, so no waffling. So that's all I wanted to say about the written report. And I hope you've come through this part of the presentation with some specific advice that you can use in the future. Again, my top recommendations: start with the executive summary, end with the action points, and keep the middle brief and targeted, using the language that directors want to hear. They want to hear cost, they want to hear risk, they want to hear reputation. They do not want to hear acronyms. So now you've got your perfect report. You've done everything that we've just talked about. And you might be invited to the board meeting or a management meeting to present this to them. And it's at this point that you might be tempted to just stand there and read what you've written. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Verbal reporting requires a whole different skill set. And if you can master it, the art of presenting a report, then you can really demonstrate your value to the board. So let's talk a bit about presentation style. And let's start with, I think at this point, Kim, is when we've got some survey questions for
Yes,
people.
we do have a couple of survey questions.
Cool.
So, how confident are you when presenting to the board? And just to kind of talk about this a little bit, I don't think I probably would have shriveled, to speak in front of a room of, the managing committee, where I worked 20 years ago. Now I would not have that problem.
Right.
And it just experience
Yes.
whenever you, if you are, for those of you who are doing it for the first time, or even the second or third time, you'll always get a little bit of nervousness, I think.
Yeah.
I bet it's
Absolutely.
hard for outsourced compliance people who have to do it for multiple companies. I was
Yes.
kind of thinking about that because, you've got to have the details at in your mind, not even at your fingertips, the absolute details if they start questioning you. Um, and I was like, it's one thing to do it if count yourself lucky if you're just a compliance officer for one company.
Yes.
Yes.
I agree completely.
Okay. So we've got results in. We are showing about 16% is saying they're very confident. That's fantastic. Uh, about 40% are saying somewhat. You get through it. 36 nervous, but again, you you're prepared, you get through it, and 10% of you are terrified. So I think that's pretty good. That kind of the 10% I bet are probably the newbies who have kind of are still learning the ropes. And so yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And the next one, I don't, did you have anything to say about that? Like
No,
your first
no,
one?
I'm very interested in the results. I think there's a lot more confident people out there than I'd hoped for. So that's terrific.
Yeah, it is good. It is good. And the next one is what's your biggest challenge in board presentations? Okay, we're getting some good. Yeah. I liked one of your things was addressing the tough questions. And
Yeah.
you might even be touching on this later. You know, when you've got that board, that one board member who digs. I mean, they're like
Mhm.
a dog with the bone sometimes. And I had to deal with that. I actually appreciated that though. I mean, what's your experience with that?
Well, you're a braver woman than I am. We will talk a bit about, dealing with those tough questions.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I think my character flaws is that I tend to get defensive. Somebody asks me a question, instead of just kind of calmly giving a nice answer that makes sense, I kind of think, well, wasn't this guy listening to me? I just went over this. So we'll talk a bit about how to handle those questions, but that's certainly been my experience.
Yeah. My experience was that whenever I had somebody who was really challenging and what some would call, difficult or something like that, I always thought it's like actually it was my experience that I saw them as like, oh, they're thinking at it from a different perspective than I thought, and oh, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it, or I never thought of that. And so I was willing to kind of go back to the drawing board and think through things. I thought those tough questions were good. I welcomed them towards, the end of my career. Even now, I still do. Okay, so we've got a pretty good mix here. Yeah, 41% are saying addressing the tough questions is the most challenging for them. And about a good split, 22 and 23% are saying, simplifying is their challenge, the
Mhm.
complex information, and 23 is keeping the board engaged, and of course 14% is making your points stick. And of course I'm sure you're going to have some good tips for us on that as well. And the next thing is, how does your board typically react to AML presentations? Are they engaged? Are they just politely nodding, wishing they were on the beach? uh, are they distracted or defensive? When in your experience, what I guess, do you find that most boards are pretty engaged these days?
These days, yes. When I
Yeah.
started out, no. Wh- Um, I came to Cayman a very, very long time ago. I won't say exactly how long. Those of you in the audience who know me are probably thinking, is she still
I
here? My God. Um,
when I first moved there, I bet some of these people in this audience weren't even born yet.
But when I first came to Cayman, it was such a lovely place to practice law because if a client asked you a tax question, you had a one word legal opinion, no.
Yeah.
Um, and if they asked you a compliance question, you had a one paragraph answer saying, you register with the registrar and you make your annual
Hmm.
filing, and that's how things were when I got here. And so when we started with kind of additional regulatory burden, new obligations, changing obligations, things changing for a little while there, it seemed like things changed every year. And we were
Hmm.
constantly updating boards on changes, changes, changes. And that was when I got a bit more of the defensive kind of, what are you sure we have to do this? Are you certain? Kind of defensive and challenging mood. But I can say, especially here with the clients we have at Leeward, they are engaged. They get it. This is something that they do. They do it well. They want to hear from us. They go beyond the kind of mild interest and into the very engaged category, I would think.
Hmm. Good. Yeah, so we do have with the polling results, it's like most people agree. 42% are saying very engaged, lots of questions. 45% are saying polite nodding. So to me, that's probably a very typical one, unless you're kind of saying, "Hey, we got some problems here."
Yes.
4% are saying distracted and 9% defensive. The only thing I would add to that is that, I feel like most companies, having done what I do now and working with a lot of different companies, boards are so focused on the cash flow and the revenues, and compliance is really just kind of a cost. They just want to make sure you got it. You're doing what you should do, and you've got the resources. They really need to focus on where's our next, market move to grow the business, or where are we hurting. Um, it's or where's our capital coming from, for the next, acquisition, or merger
Yeah.
or something like that. So I think that might be one of the reasons why the polite nodding when it comes to the AML stuff, and just depending on where you at, that would just be my kind of thought. Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you for those of you who respond to that. That's
Thanks,
fantastic.
everyone.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, and a little bit different from what I kind of expected as an old cynical old lady. So maybe that's a bit more promising, and maybe that's a credit to those of you in the industry right now that you're doing a good job of keeping your boards interested and engaged.
Mhm.
Um, so I want to move on to some tips for effective verbal communication. The first thing, and I think I touched on this, is to summarize and don't recite. The board already got your written report. You don't need to read it to them. Pick out, if it's an ordinary day and there's nothing horrible that you need to focus on and report on in detail, if you're just kind of giving your regular quarterly, we're doing our jobs, we're finding the odd thing, we're addressing it appropriately, and there's nothing for you to panic about, you should be looking to give 3 bullet points saying that. Don't recite or read the entire report. That's not necessary. Just highlight the key risks and the decisions and the actions from the report. So 3 bullet points, and just use your report as a reference if you need to look back at it for some of the metrics or some of the data. Try to make eye contact and engage the audience if you're in the same room together. If you're on video, then think about the etiquette of being on video. Put your camera on. Even if your hair looks like mine today, just put your camera on. Make sure that they visibly see that you're active and engaged. That causes a physical response in the audience where they will become more active and engaged. Um, really try, when you're giving your bullet points, to link your AML issues or reports or points to the organization's overall strategy, reputation, and risk appetite. So, for example, if you were saying, we've seen a 20% increase in investors from America, then you might want to tie that in to the organization's strategy to expand their investor base in the States. So you don't just say 20% increase in investors from America. You say 20% increase in investors from America, reflecting the success of our organization's strategy to expand in that jurisdiction. If you have specific things to report in your report, use storytelling. Um, don't just say, in the course of undertaking our world check screening, we discovered that this person has a gang connection. Use storytelling. Start off with, you can skip the once upon a time part, but say, there is a gang in San Francisco that is involved in human trafficking. It does this, do a bit of research, find out what you can, make it real, and then say, this person that we found who applied to be an investor, we discovered has a connection to this gang. We rejected the business and we made a report. Use storytelling. Don't just say this guy had gang connections, so we got rid of him. Tie it into something real. Use storytelling when you can. And use those real world examples to illustrate to the board that this isn't just a paper exercise that we're all doing. Show how this actually has an impact on crime prevention in the real world. Okay, so you want to give that example of how your proactive compliance actions helped and prevented a bad thing from happening, which is why we're all here. Okay, use facts and context. So tie things back to data if you can. Directors love data. Use visuals if you can. If you're clever enough, all you young people, to use pie charts and get ChatGPT to make up things that move on the page for you. You could say things like, based on last year's metrics, our exposure to this particular risk is manageable because. And so you talk more about the context of what you're reporting on. And if you are asked a tough question and you just don't have those facts and you can't give them because you didn't sleep well last night, you don't know, or you never thought of it and you didn't look it up, um, don't fudge, just confess, just say, let me get the exact figures and I'll send them to you this afternoon. Nobody's going to expect you to know everything at all times, so there is no shame in that. So other tough questions that come in, and they do, you always want to stay calm and professional. Don't be like me. Do not get defensive. Do not say, weren't you listening when I was talking 5 minutes ago? Don't do that. I don't know how I still have a job, honestly. Um, Take a moment to gather your thoughts. Take a breath. Avoid that defensive language and focus on the issue and not the tone of the question. And acknowledge that it's a valid question. Say, that's a good point. We'll look into a solution. Or if the question comes to you and it really is just a grump or a criticism, then you're going to want to reframe this. So if the board member comes to you with a grump about how much compliance software costs these days, then you want to switch that tone from critical to positive. So you want to say, we see the deployment of our new screening software as a great opportunity to make sure that our current screening is correct and to ensure that we're catching everything that could possibly cause a reputational risk. So you want to take a negative criticism, you spend too much on software, and you want to turn it into a positive. The board has a better service as a result. So there are certain questions you should always be ready for. These come up time and time again. The first one is always, do we have enough resources for AML compliance? And I get asked this all the time, and you need to be able to give an answer that is honest and also ensures that the board doesn't think, oh my gosh, these guys are always asking for more. So you may want to say something like, current resourcing allows us to meet our compliance requirements. As risks evolve, we need to ensure that our systems and our teams can keep pace. And at that point, if you have any recommendations for growth or new software or new tools, that's when you could make your pitch. The next question that we get is, why should we invest in more in AML? We've never had an issue. This is an opportunity for you to pat yourself on the back, and don't be shy about saying, we've never had an issue because your compliance team catches them before they get in the door. And you want to emphasize that even though everything is fine today, the risk environment is constantly evolving. And if you're in the regulated space, you don't have a choice. So you've just got to invest in it. And you really want to emphasize that regardless of the regulator kind of looming over your shoulder, the real issue is that the reputational risk of having an issue far outweighs the costs of the preventative measures that you could have put into place if you'd had the budget. Another one that we get is, are we doing more than our competitors? Are we doing less than our competitors? Are we paying more than our competitors? I do recommend that you always, just as a matter of course, keep an eye on the competition, know what people are charging for these services, and if your rates are higher or if you are spending more, be prepared to justify that. Yeah, we're spending a little bit more, but we've got Leeward doing it and they're great, and they're doing a lot more than what we could be doing in-house, and so it's cheaper. Send it, pitch it that way. So be aware of the industry benchmarks and be able to show that you are in line with your competitors. And if you're not in line with competitors, then be sure you can justify that. Another one that comes up is, are we fully compliant with the AML regulations in all of our jurisdictions? This might require a degree of omnipotence that most of us don't have. But what you can say is, we are continually assessing our policies against the regulatory expectations, but we don't have compliance personnel in every jurisdiction on earth. So we comply with all current AML laws and regulations that apply to us, and it's an ongoing process. And then this question comes up quite a bit. Can we take a more commercial approach to AML? And I think for most of us, the goal in responding to this one is to assure the board that we're already taking a commercial approach to AML. And you want to emphasize that your role is to strike the right balance between AML requirements and business growth, and that your approach allows for commercial decisions while maintaining compliance. So the key takeaways in giving the verbal presentation of your report is be engaging, make eye contact, turn the camera on. If the board's asleep, you've already lost. And be very strategic. Always show them the so what. And that was a big point as well in your written work, is put your director hat on. Think about what you're saying to the board and think, why do they care about this? Or why should they care about this? So what? And you need to be able to answer those questions. So I wanted to leave a bit of time at the end, and I see we've got about 10 minutes to go for questions. Kimberly, I don't know how you normally do this. Did you want to open it up or did you want to just chat?
Yeah, so feel free to post your questions. I do see there's only one. Let me just double check. Yep, sorry, it's just somebody giving us a thumbs up there.
Nope.
I have lots to talk about. So yeah, having kind of sat in the seat, written the reports, knowing they were not read, and um, and wrote too much. Didn't use bullet points. Didn't use visuals. I think I tried to do some charts and stuff like that, knowing because I understand. I slowly realized that as long as they felt confident in me to have it under control, they were not going to worry. But again, this was 15 years ago, last time I did that. Um, not quite 15 years ago, but 2012, I think was my last one. Um, so some of the tips that I would have or experiences that I have or questions I would have really, and I'll go to my questions first, is we're assuming in all cases that you put together the presentation like PowerPoint or whatever, and you're sending it to the board before the actual meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's how we usually see things happening in this universe. Again, because we are a service provider doing compliance for our clients. As you say, I might be, my team might be giving reports to 3 different funds in one day. So we do a formal written report and send it out in advance.
Okay. I've got other people asking questions, so I'm going
Mhm.
to focus on their questions. Let me see.
If anybody
Let's see
asks how old I am, I'm not answering.
Okay, somebody's asking, is it a regulatory requirement to present the report to the board, or could the report just be sent and then the board can advise if they'd like us to present?
Yeah, you can just send it in.
You can,
It's going
okay,
to be
yeah, that's all
entirely
I
up
did.
to the chairperson who calls the board meeting whether they want you to attend and present or whether they're just willing to just append the report and take it
Mhm.
as read in the minutes.
Okay. When the last item on the board meeting agenda is AML compliance, this tells everyone in the organization what is important. It's difficult to change the board's focus. Do you see that a lot? So that was a question. It was just obviously a statement, but do you see that?
Yes, and I think unfortunately what happens in a lot of our cases is that we come on in the schedule after the fund administrator. So in funds board meetings, the board sits and listens to the administrator drone on for quite some time about net asset value and investor flows and that kind of thing. And so they've just been hit in the face with, a massive amount of data, and then they say now over to the AML bod, and you go, oh no, how do I
Yeah.
wake everybody up after that? And I think that
Yeah.
the best approach is again, if there is something important that they need to know, then tackle it first while you've got a bit of their attention before they before they wear themselves right out.
Yeah. How big is the board sizes on average that you present to or have worked on? I mean, are we talking 4 or 5 people? Are we talking 20 people? I mean, what's
I- I'd want to ask my team about that, what their experience is. But in my case, I would say that the average size of the board is 4.
okay?
Or 5. Now, I have had to give a presentation to a publicly listed company's board once, and there were 30 suits around that table,
Okay.
and that was truly scary. Um, so it does depend.
Okay.
But a fund always has to have two, so there's going to be at least two, and usually they aim for an odd number. So.
Yeah, and do you find that like there's always like one, you know, person on the board who's kind of they take on the tougher compliance questions, and then the other board members are kind of like, yeah, we're going to focus on like capital
Yes,
mergers.
I
Yeah.
think that
Okay.
if there's an independent board member, if there's kind of a non-executive board member sitting there, that's the person who's going to be asking you about Cayman Islands compliance.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's a CEO who's actually in the actual running of the business, they're going to be more focused on what the administrator and what the numbers are.
Okay. Oh, this is a good question. Somebody's asking, can the report be purely verbal? No presentation, no written? I would think not, because wouldn't the auditors have to?
It wouldn't be preferable. I mean, as
Okay.
long as it's being minuted correctly. So you stand up and give the report to the board, and then the secretary at the meeting takes careful notes and then minutes that within the body of the minutes, then that would be an adequate uh, record of the receipt of the AML report by the board. I don't like it because I like to cover my butt.
Yeah.
And I don't want somebody saying, oh, you didn't raise this. And if there's a written report, then nobody can do that.
Okay. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Um, see if I can get through. Yeah, somebody's saying there's no consistent reporting template I have seen across several meetings. Is it Yeah, they're asking if there's a kind of what's expected in a report, but I think those might be those first few slides. Oh, they're asking for a specific for an SPV or structured finance mandate. Um, I
Oh,
think that
okay.
might have to be a kind of more detailed conversation with
Yeah,
you off, yeah, off
yeah,
topic because
I'd be
yeah.
more than happy to talk through the nuances of any particular type of entity. There are always going to be nuances that depend on, what type of company you're talking about. And if you're dealing with, things that have segregated portfolios, then you obviously want to fraction that out when you're presenting your metrics and things like that. You're quite
Mhm.
right that there's no kind of universally accepted format for an AML report. When we see a minute of a meeting, we all know what we're looking at. All minutes of the meeting kind of follow the same structure, a header, numbered paragraphs, it's noted that, it's resolved that, and a signature at the bottom. AML reports do vary more widely, but I really like the idea of executive summary first, contents being the things to pay attention to, the metrics and the report on just the activity, and then the action points at the end. And if there's multiple action points, I really do like a table at the back. But it is entirely up to you and your own personal style, how you want to present it.
Okay. And are you actually presenting like with the slide deck and you're standing up in front of these four or five people, or are you sitting at the table with them and just kind of going through, handouts?
Usually sitting at the table going through the handout, quite
Okay.
often these days doing it online through a Teams meeting. But when I did that big public company meeting up in New York, yeah, like that was, wear your suit,
That one. Yeah, we're
put on
much
the
more
heels,
formal. Yeah.
yeah, and show
And
up with a PowerPoint.
yeah. And should it make anybody nervous if you do go in and you do your, presentation with them or go through the report with them and then they ask you to leave the room? Is that, I mean, I guess
Yeah,
they're just kind of going on to the next topic, really.
that's exactly
Or,
what's happening. Yeah, they're
okay.
not talking about you behind your back. They haven't noticed the mustard stain on your tie. That none of that. When they ask you to leave after your report, it's because they're going to start talking about HR issues or strategic things that aren't relevant to you. So you should actually be expected to be present in the meeting just for your bit, and then out.
Okay, great. And let me see what is what about, let me ask you, see, yeah, somebody is saying, well, if there's a clean report, like there's nothing wrong, what should be presented? I guess it's just that. Nothing's wrong.
Exactly,
You know,
exactly that.
I would focus on for the person who's asking that. My person was like, hey, we onboarded X number of new
Yeah.
clients. These were the ones that were low risk. We had 20% that were low risk and 50% were sorry, I can't do my math. It's too early in the morning. But you get where I'm like. Um, I'm looking at personally, like even things like onboarding times. How,
Yes.
because I'm looking for efficiency. in our system. So I'm always looking for ways. It's like, how can we show to our users that they've been able to go from, 2 days of onboarding to, 90 seconds, kind
Yeah.
of thing. And so that kind of stuff, which is also, and maybe you've had to do this, um, when you have bought a new software, and do you have to report on, well, obviously, I would think, the success of its implementation, and but also like ROI. Do these compliance officers also have to know ROI these days?
Yeah, I have had the occasional request where a director has said to me, "How much does compliance cost my organization? And
Hmm.
how much have you saved us?" And my
Yes.
response is always, "How long is a rope?" It
I'm sh-
depends.
yeah, it depends. Yeah, it does depend on the organization.
Yes.
Um, we're trying to address that. I mean, just that's just one of our challenge, one of the things that I want to solve, and so we're doing everything we can as far as like, yeah, this, not just how much should that software cost, but is it saving you later down the road from having to hire more people or risking a
Yeah.
fine? Is it providing you with, is it even raising your brand,
Yes.
with more technology being used? So now suddenly your people that you're onboarding don't have to go print, sign a document,
Yeah.
scan,
Yeah.
it's, that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, some people don't even have access to that stuff anymore. Everything's on their
Yeah.
phones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
So
that
yeah.
if you do have that situation where you're challenged on justifying the cost of your compliance program, you
Hmm.
really have to focus on those intangibles. And
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing. It's not like I can say it cost me $10 to make a widget, I sell it for $20, my profit is therefore $10, and that's that. You have more intangible things that you need to express to them. And unfortunately, it's not easily quantifiable, but you can certainly emphasize that avoiding reputational damage is huge to a business. Very
Oh
difficult to put a
yeah.
dollar
Oh,
sign on it, but to be able to say, look, we stopped a sanctioned person from getting into our investors' uh,
mhm,
body, and because of that, we're not locked out of the U.S. financial system. That was a save the company moment, and
mhm.
you did that by keeping that investor away. So
Yeah,
you have to make sure that the board understands that. And getting
yeah,
back to the question about, what do I report when I have nothing to report? Nothing's going on. You're right. You can't give a 10-page AML report when all you want to say is, we had no new investors this month. Everything's fine. It is an opportunity to promote, though, all of the things that you're doing to keep it fine. And
yes,
so, as much as you can't say, look, I onboarded 30 new clients this week, and this is what I did, and this is what we found, you can always say, we took the opportunity to ensure that our systems were working properly, and, emphasize the intangible things that you're bringing to the table when there's really nothing much else to report.
yeah.
Promote yourselves. You're important.
Yeah, I might get that Christmas bonus or that
Yeah,
raise.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. So I'm trying to find some and anything else as well that uh yeah, okay. So at one point you did mention about, how are the competitors doing?
Yeah,
What did they spend? What are they doing?
yeah,
Um, one person is asking, well, how do you find that out? And I think I don't know where this person is based.
yeah.
Obviously, you and I both have Cayman and smaller jurisdictions. It's like usually at the bar,
Yes.
or at least that's how it was in my day. I don't know what you young kids are doing nowadays. Um, but yeah, just at the compliance associations, talking
Yes.
to people. That would be my response to that. So any professional organizations that you attend in compliance, and like I said, usually if you know this person might be at a much larger, like in the US in New York or something. Yeah, I don't think there's a way you could really just kind of research online. That is a work boots on the ground kind of stuff,
Yeah.
unless you have some ideas.
Well, I think it's all about connections and relationships. And when I speak very much from the Cayman Islands perspective, where
Hmm.
we are a tight group, we know each other. I can probably tell you what, competitors in my industry of providing compliance services
Hmm.
are charging, but I'm not always going to know. Make friends, go to conferences, join the associations, have a voice, be present, and listen, and you will pick up this information.
Yeah, yeah, you will. I mean, I have people, reaching out to me and they'll go, "Oh, we're not sure is this because we do configurations. They'll say, "We're not sure if this is the right setting for us, or the right threshold, or is that right? What are other people doing?"
Yeah.
And it's like I say, well, in your industry, this is pretty common. Settings, and I'm talking specifically about like screening settings, thresholds, and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, that's really the only thing I could, everybody else is kind of different, um, but yeah, that's the only thing I can kind of say. Yeah, maybe your screening is too low or too high, or depending on what's kind of going on in that particular organization. I hope that does kind of help them. Okay, we are top of the hour, so I do think. Oh, somebody says one of the best presenters.
Oh,
I
how nice.
I know.
Oh, I owe
So
somebody a
thank.
drink.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh, yeah, yeah, that's somebody else said the best. So this
Awesome.
is, yeah, very great, very informative, great presentation. I thought you brought up some great stuff there.
Okay.
Um, and I could chat with you forever about this. I'm just trying to see if there was anything else I made. Yeah, focus on the efficiency, the processes, project management, things like when those new regs come out, and I'll talk specifically about, Cayman's beneficial ownership. You have to go back and do remediation, get new data, and
Hmm.
those are things that I would report. Just that progress. One question I did have is
Hmm.
when you are presenting to the board, are you sometimes asking them to make a decision right then and there? If are you presenting them with potential solutions and
Yeah.
uh, okay, and options, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you're asking them to decide right then and there, or is that when they say, "Leave the room, we'll let you know"?
Yeah, usually I've presented them with kind of these are your two options. You can go with, this software, that software, this is the cost. And a lot of times they'll make that decision right in the moment. Sometimes they do want to confer, take it under advisement, and come back with directions.
Okay, great. And uh, do you ever have to do it like in conjunction with IT people as
Oh,
well, like
God,
with
no.
other? You've never done your presentation with others. Like I was kind of thinking, well, what about like cybersecurity, GDPR, vendor risk, like especially when you're talking about like you just acquired this new software or something.
Yes, I mean there are going to be what I try to do is, as much as the board doesn't want to listen to an AML person, they really don't want to listen to the IT people. So,
I'm glad we're not the worst.
so
Okay, Brendan.
what I would try to
Uh,
do is assimilate that into my report and just if there's an IT component or a data protection component to what I'm reporting on for compliance, I would embed that in my report so that they just get one person to talk to about this issue, and then I would deal with the IT and the other aspects
Okay.
outside the
And
boardroom. Yeah.
one last very, very important question that just came in.
Yes.
I have to ask it. Should we be more concerned or less concerned about people with hazel eyes now?
They're very shifty. You can
They
never
are.
tell. Green, brown. Yeah, I would be very worried. High risk all the way.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. That was very informative. I wish had known you, 15, 20 years ago when I was having to do these. I probably would have not wasted many hours of my time writing stuff that was never read, and giving them a lot more information. Anyways,
Well, thank
so
you for
again,
having me.
and for anybody who does, again, there is a handout with about Leeward, and here's Barbara's email. If you, for those of you who had those kind of a deeper dive questions, do feel free to reach out to Barbara. Anybody who has information about Silo, you can reach out to Tom Gardner. Thank you, Tom. Did we get through all the polls? I think we did. Oh, there's one more a poll if
Oh,
everybody
is there?
has time. Yeah. If Tom, yes. After today's session, do you feel more confident? Sorry, we might have lost a few people, but we still have quite a few. Oh, yes. Good response. Yes, they feel much
Oh,
clearer
excellent.
now. Um, fantastic. No one's saying no, so that's
That's good.
good. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So yeah, good over 80%, and 20% are saying kind of somewhat they can at least start drafting. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, and somebody's asking me to share the contact screen again. Oh, sorry, Tom, if you can just close that out. Thank you. So somebody can see the share screen again. Fantastic. Um, and also, I am going to be hosting, I call it Zen and the Art of AML Compliance. It's AML training awareness for anybody who it will be virtual. I'll be doing that in May. So if anybody is desperately looking for virtual, live, interactive online training, we will be promoting that. And I call it Zen because I love compliance. My stress level is actually very low when I'm working, and it goes up whenever I go out for lunch or something. So very unusual for me. And but I like it. I like the whole the circle of life because it goes from the FATF to new regulations. Kind of, and it's just going to start again. So it's kind of a mindset shift is how I get through the noise and the fear of it. So I do hope everybody can join us for that. And of course, Tom can give you some information there. Again, thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate your time today. And just to remind our audience, for those who are new, we do not pay Barbara or any of our guests. They don't pay us. They have taken this time of their own accord to provide this information and share this. Something that's very important to me and to, I think, most of our guests, that we get this information out there because so many are struggling. So many of you are on your own. You're the only compliance officer at your organization, and you may very well be struggling and not have anybody to bounce ideas with. I was very lucky, and I think you were too, Barbara,
Definitely.
with your background. Even though I might have been the only compliance officer in that office, there was somebody I could talk to, some very well trained legal mind, and that they could help me through those tougher questions. And I'm just, like I said, through the years, I slowly became aware that others do not have that privilege. So
Mhm.
this is why AML Gray Matters exists. So we do encourage everyone to share it. We don't charge. Um, Share it with others. And yes, certificates will be sent out in about an hour. And again, check the website, silocompliance.com, the AML Gray Matters tab. That's where you can see old recordings and you can see future topics and register for future topics and even download the slides. I think it will probably take a couple days to get the recording up. So don't you won't see it right away, but probably wait till Friday or Monday for that. Barbara, again, thank you very much. And to everyone in our audience and your wonderful questions, thank you. And I hope everyone has a fantastic day.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank
Bye
you,
now.
everyone. Bye.